This is the Everything Saxophone podcast with Donna Schwartz and Nick Manella, episode 28. Today we're going to be interviewing Daniel Bennett. Daniel is a saxophonist and woodwind artist living in New York City. He also runs his own band called the Daniel Bennett Group, and he is an awesome composer, teacher, pretty much the whole package. He's got a lot of really great stuff to say in this episode, and I know that you're going to enjoy it and get a lot out of it. Thanks so much for taking the time, Daniel, and really looking forward to talking to you.
It's great to be here.
So why don't you give our listeners a little bit of background on yourself, a little bit of an idea of what you kind of do and what you're all about.
I was born and raised in Rochester, New York, in a little town called Honeoye Falls. It actually looks like Hanoia Falls. It's hard to pronounce.
Okay.
It's a tiny little town of about 5,000 people. But I was fortunate enough to have a great band director named Mark Borden, who kind of helped shape me at a young age. So I was born and raised in the Rochester, New York area. And like a lot of kids, did band, concert band, marching band, jazz band, anything I could get my hands on, any opportunity to play, I was right there. My sister took me to a fourth grade band concert, I was in fourth grade, and she took me to a high school band concert, and I got hooked on the sound of the saxophone. I heard a kid named Chris Oldfield playing Pink Panther. And from that point on, I was hooked. I'm sure this is pretty common among us saxophonists. I'm sure you have your story too. When you first heard the saxophone. So from that point on, I was just immersed in music, and like a lot of kids, I was trying out for all state, all county band, all this stuff. And in high school, I taught myself to play guitar, and I was in rock bands, and I was playing in church 3 times a week. So I was just fully immersed in music from a young age.
Oh, that's great, man. So I assume that your school program that you went through had a pretty good music program and was fairly supportive of people kind of going all in on music?
They did, man. And here's the funny thing. This guy, Mark Borden, who was my high school band director, we were one of the first groups. Actually, we were, when the Essentially Ellington competition launched at Lincoln Center, I believe it was 1996, and our group was the first, one of the first groups we competed, and we came in second or third place. Now, of course, at that time, I think there was only maybe a dozen groups that actually auditioned for the festival, but Mark Borden had his eye, he had his radar out there. So he had a good eye for musical opportunities. So we got to go to New York, and we met with Marcellus, and we got to play, we played, I believe the judges at that time in 96, I think Michael Brecker was there. Wow. Horace Silver was one of the judges. Of course, Winton, so we were just, these little high school kids, had no clue. And Essentially Ellington, I don't know, for anyone who doesn't know, it's a competition. Yeah, as you know, Nick, it's the music of Duke Ellington and high school jazz groups prepare these pieces. But this was the first year that they did it. So there was not as much hype surrounding it. It was kind of a new thing that they were trying. So we did it, and it was great. And we did it twice. We got in twice. So I got to go to the festival twice as a high school student. This little high school, Honeoye Falls, New York, had really great, strong teachers, which really that's what it comes down to. It doesn't really have a lot to do with coming from a prestigious background or coming from big money or something. A lot of times, as all of us have encountered, some of the best teachers that we have are just really hardworking music educators who helped to shape us from a young age.
Yeah, definitely. And I always say this on the podcast, but I think it bears repeating, is that so many of the best musicians that I talk to, they point back to their first music teacher as being, the most important, the most seminal in their development. And I think your story definitely just goes to show that that's true, globally.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. So fast forward to today. Where do you live? How do you make your living in music? What's going on with you these days?
Yeah, so I'm living in New York City. I've lived in Manhattan for about almost 10 years. I have 2 kids, Naomi and Hudson, my wife Gretchen, who's a very supportive musician wife.
That's great.
Yeah. Actually, my friend Sammy Stein, she's a writer in England, a jazz critic. She's writing a book about women in jazz, but she actually contacted my wife Gretchen because she wanted to get some insight from a musician's wife, which is kind of unique. So my wife Gretchen could tell stories. She could probably tell better stories even than I could, just from her perspective on what she's seen and what it takes. But she's amazing. So I live in New York, and I've been here for a while. I'm a freelance musician. I tour. I do over 100 tour dates a year as a band leader. I also play in many theater shows, Broadway, off-Broadway, subbing on shows, studio work, commercials, just a lot of every day is different. I also teach at the New York Jazz Academy in Times Square and Bloomingdale School of Music on the Upper West Side, which is another great school.
Yeah, and that was one of the reasons that I really was so happy that you're coming on today, is that you're really doing a little bit of everything. So it's going to give us a great insight into, that real kind of freelance life, especially in a city like New York, which I think a lot of musicians out there listening might either be pursuing or thinking about going into. But before we get into all that stuff, I wanted to talk to you about your group and some of the stuff that you're trying to do with your original music. Now, I've seen your music described as very unpredictable, and I thought that was such an awesome way to describe what you do. What makes your music really go down that road, and why do you enjoy, an adjective such as that?
It's our music is honest music, and it's driven by our melodies. To me, a melody is the king. So this is the funny thing, Nick. I compose all of my music from the guitar.
Oh, really?
Yeah, this is funny. I've actually never composed a piece from the piano.
Huh.
I strum chords on my guitar and I sing. And when I can remember something clearly in my mind, if I can sing something and I can, quickly, then I know that I have a good melody.
Right.
So I strum chords, and then at some point I transfer that to my saxophone or my flute or something, one of my wind instruments. And all of my albums, we have 8 albums out, and every record has guitar in it. I have never had a full-time pianist in my group. It's always been guitar. So that has shaped me a lot. To me, composing from the guitar forces me. The guitar has some, this is going to be maybe not the right word, but there's limitations on the guitar, just by strumming chord. To me, when I try to compose on the piano, I almost have too many choices in front of me. Right. And the melody ends up sounding contrived and this and that. And that's just me. And maybe that's my own limitations. I don't know, because I know pianists who would disagree with me. I mean, obviously, but this is just my own story. I don't write well from the piano. So melody is king when I write music. So and the music is unpredictable because let me say it this way. I recently have sort of publicly stated that we don't describe our music anymore. We try not to. Right. So we let our listeners describe it. So what has happened, Nick, is many people have different descriptions for our music. And over time, it almost seems like it is kind of unpredictable what we're called or what we are. I don't always plan it that way, but it has been sort of the case, at least lately.
Yeah, and I love that because one thing that I think, the press and journalists and all that kind of stuff, they try to immediately classify something because I think it makes them feel better about, okay, well, we can put this on a certain website or a certain blog that deals with this kind of music. So I love the fact that you're kind of defying that and doing your own thing,
Yeah, and I think that as soon as the artist tells the listener that this is who I am, exactly who I am, and, I'm 10% this and I'm 30% this, immediately you're actually restricting the audience, and it's kind of a drag for the listener because then they have to sort of like listen through your parameters. Our group, we were recently featured on Here and Now, which is a great show on NPR, and they were talking about the topic was it was actually rock instrumental composers who are writing in the vein of with a rock aesthetic. And I thought it was kind of funny that they were featuring our music in a way, because I don't consciously try to sound like a rock musician, and I don't sound. Now, we've had writers who say we sound like a folk group or instrumental folk or avant pop. People say, which I think avant pop is kind of, maybe that's kind of a nice title. I guess that to me that's kind of like a little bit quirky pop, but a little off the wall. I don't know,
right?
But it's as soon as you tell the listener that this is who I am, I think you're putting the listener in a very unfortunate spot.
Yeah. And it must also kind of limit opportunities a little bit. I mean, I don't know if I've actually ever thought about this before right now, is that you can really limit your opportunities as a musician if you put yourself into a narrow niche, and not allow yourself some things that may come along.
Oh, absolutely. And look, believe me, it takes a lot of courage. It's not easy. It's much easier to just tell people who you are, or to fit yourself into a specific, zone. I tell people our group floats a lot into different scenes. We just did our album release at the Blue Note in New York, and we've done a few shows at the Blue Note. So when we're in that scene, it's our, I guess that's more of a straight ahead jazz crowd. But that's not really intentional on my part, because we could easily be, at a rock venue or somewhere else. We do stuff. I think probably we've done, concert halls, museums, more serious things. We've done some pretty fun. I play in comedy clubs. I actually play, maybe we could talk about this later, but I play in an improvised musical every Saturday night in New York City. Yeah. I mean, so I certainly don't restrict myself.
Yeah. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. So talking a little bit more about composition, going back to the way that you compose, I find that really interesting that you compose on the guitar, because I notice that, when I compose on piano, I get a certain kind of sound because I'm kind of limited on the piano, right? So I can only do so many things. And then, of course, when I compose on saxophone, it turns out to be very saxophonistic, right? Because I'm doing a lot of saxophone type things, a lot of things that fit well on the instrument. So you said that you do the majority of your composing on guitar and you really kind of stay away from the piano. Do you ever compose anything on saxophone or any of the woodwind instruments that you play?
No. Isn't that funny? I've never written from the horn. It's always a guitar and my voice. Yeah.
Wow.
But I'm sure, again, it's different for everybody. So I'm sure your approach works great for you. I'm sure my aversion to writing from the piano is probably just indicative of my own limitations in that space. I mean, I've played guitar since I was a kid. Okay. And it speaks to me,
Yeah, that's awesome. I love how you say that. It speaks to you, because that's such an important part of composition, is not forcing it and letting, what you've really got in your head. You got to let it come out, Yep. Yeah. Awesome. So let's talk about influences a little bit, because I always like to talk to composers and, great instrumentalists about who they listened to when they were coming up. And, somebody who has as broad of a range as you do, who were some of the people that inspired you? Were you listening to the classic straight ahead stuff when you were growing up? You had mentioned Ellington. Were your musical tastes very broad when you were coming up?
Oh yeah, super broad. I mean, like anybody, I was into, The Cure, the Smiths. I was listening to, a lot of new wave, techno. But I love Ornette Coleman. I love Paul Desmond, but it doesn't stop there. This is funny too. I don't always talk about this, but I have a master's degree in classical saxophone from the New England Conservatory.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, so I don't always tell people this because they get a funny idea about me when does he play with that weird vibrato?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. But so when I was at NEC in Boston, I was studying Ingolf Dahl, Desenclos, Ibert, Creston, a lot of French composers. Even in high school, I was doing a lot of that stuff too. So it's a lot of influences that that are out there. Like anybody, you just take in a lot of things. You know, as a kid, I listened to a lot of folk rock. My parents were into Peter, Paul and Mary, Simon and Garfunkel. We saw Peter, Paul and Mary a couple times when I was a kid in Rochester. That was fun.
Cool.
We used to go to this big fairground where these hot air balloons, they would launch, like there'd be like 50 hot air balloons, and then Peter, Paul and Mary would be on the stage playing. And It was like, it was fun, as a kid. And I always want to capture that fun still, as an adult. I want to. The innocence is good, man. That's the stuff that really is important, is finding your own innocence from your past and bringing that forward into who you are. And it's different for everybody.
Yeah. And the word fun is really an important one, because sometimes we do forget that at the end of the day, this should be fun. And we get into that kind of self-flagellation of just, I need to get better, I need to get better, I need to get better. And we forget that it should be a release.
Yeah, but I tell you, that's why we were talking before the show about your educational videos. I appreciate what you're doing because you have a great energy and it's fun. It's clear that, in your videos, you're working out these tough musical concepts. I was just watching your video about making a practice log, practice journal. And that might seem like a really heavy topic, but you presented it in a great way that it was very exciting. And I was thinking to myself, like, man, I got to do that. I don't have a practice journal. Yeah, it really depends on how it's presented. It's amazing how you can present things in such a, it just depends on the performer and how they're doing it. We've all had horrible teachers in the past, and we've all had great teachers. And like I said at the start of the show, some of our best teachers are these very, very unassuming, hardworking people who they're so well-rounded. They can catch every part of your brain at a young age and shape you. A lot of these conservatory teachers are so one-dimensional, and I really mean that. Not all of them, but some of them are. Some of these music schools, you're not going to get someone who's going to fully shape you and shape your mind.
Right.
And that's what young musicians need from a teacher.
Yeah, so that is interesting. I had no idea that you went to NEC and had that classical degree. So for somebody like you who really, I think, is very free of limitations because of the way that you've built your career and kind of the way that you've put yourself out there to the world. But what did you get out of that classical degree that you felt was really worth it? Was there a lot that you take into your everyday life as a player and a band leader? Or was that something that, I don't know, that you don't really rely on?
It gave me a lot of self-confidence.
Okay.
I was in a very low spot in my career. I moved to Boston. I was, coming from a small town to the big city, and I needed something. Now, NEC was not friendly to me at first.
Okay.
I love NEC, but anyone listening that went to any college experience, right? We all have these like dark moments.
Right.
But when I left it, when I graduated, I realized that it gave me a lot of self-confidence to extend my technique. And my classical teacher, Ken Radnofsky, kicked my butt a lot. And I needed that. He was very strict about tone, intonation, articulation, playing in front of a mirror, tuner, metronome. And I hated it at first, but now I really appreciate it so much, what it did for me. But all that to say, I was surrounded by so many teachers. In my undergrad in Rochester, I went to a Christian college called Roberts Wesleyan College. They had great teachers as well. I had many great teachers, but I was getting so almost feisty, Nick. I wanted so badly at some point to be myself.
Right.
And it wasn't until I finished NEC and went through some stuff and I observed a lot of things and I realized, like, this is it. You have to be yourself and let it all go. Doesn't matter who you offend. It doesn't matter. You have to be yourself. Life is short.
Right.
As we all know, life is short. So, yeah, that's my long answer.
No, that's great. And how do you avoid that pressure of not fitting the mold? So you mentioned you made that decision, and I imagine that takes a lot of courage to make that decision and be able to go out there with your own original voice, because, you know, you may not get work. People might hate your original voice. You know, all these thoughts that we have in our head about truly being ourselves and trying to build a career, pay the bills, all that kind of stuff. How did you get to the point where you had that courage to just, okay, I'm going to take this music and I'm going to go out there and play it, and I don't care what anybody says about it?
Yeah, you know what's really funny? For about 3 years after NEC, I was performing a lot, full time. I was very active, but I was a booking agent. Okay. I produced a festival in Rochester for 4 years. I was booking clubs in Boston and performing at the clubs. So I was sort of becoming, I was doing publicity. I had my own record label. I was doing a lot of non-performing things in the background, and I was learning a lot about how, in a way, I almost learned that a lot of the musicians were feeling the same way that I was, and that it's okay to be yourself. I think I just got a different glimpse of what the music industry is, and at that point, I think I was just ready to break free, and I quickly burned out from all that extra stuff that I was doing. I didn't want to be a producer. I didn't want to own a record label. I want to perform. You know, it's all about how I was raised too, I suppose. I was raised to be, you know, my parents were very nurturing, but they also believed that it was important to stand up for what you believe in. I became a Christian when I was 16. I was playing in church 3 times a week, and I didn't even know why I was playing in church until I became a Christian. I thought, wow, that's cool. So there's more to life than just blowing into a saxophone.
Right.
Now, granted, and I'll tell you, Nick, granted, I know everyone's story is different, so I'm certainly not trying to preach on you now, but this is just some things that happened to me early on, was that I realized that there's more to life, and that you have to get out there right now and do it and fail hard. I say this a lot in interviews. You have to fail hard. I mean, my group, we will fly all over the country and try things. We just wrapped a show at Herb Alpert's club in LA, Vibrato. We flew to LA. I think we did 2 clinics. I think we did 2 club dates, and we premiered all new music. I had no idea how the music was going to go over at the club. And we did it. We put it out there, and we went home. And that's what you do. And then you build on those experiences. And believe me, this is something I've learned. When you fail, nobody remembers that you failed. I mean, There might be one person, maybe you failed in front of one, you know, maybe there was one important person that maybe you feel they saw you, you know, whatever, you lost a gig or something, and that the booking agent, there's always somebody that you think is watching you. They're going to forget about you very, very quickly. And I've learned this, and same with critics. I mean, you can get completely roasted by a critic. I promise you, the next year, that critic probably won't even be writing about music anymore. The critics are burning out fast, which is great, because there's always new people coming up to write about you. Right. So don't sweat it when you get a bad review, because there's always going to be a new critic popping up. So it's just little life things that I've learned along the way.
Yeah, no, and that's great advice, especially for somebody who, like I said, is starting their career or starting to think about, you know, I really want to do my own thing. And of course, all those thoughts in the back of your head. But one thing that you said just now that I thought was really interesting is that you had all these other kind of gigs in the music industry. Now, I'm wondering, even though you didn't like it very much, did you feel like that really helped you now that you have your own group and you have to do all this stuff in support of your group, like booking, like, you know, press outreach, all the things that go along with leading your own band? Did your experience in the industry outside of just playing help you with that now?
Yes, 100%. I mean, I was booking 3 different jazz venues in Boston. And I was booking my group there, but I was also the full-time booking agent for these clubs. And I learned a lot. I learned about what you should not do. And I'll tell you what's funny, Nick. This is the funny thing. I actually realized the number one thing that really would cause me to hire a group at a club, I loved it when groups were persistent. Now, this goes against some of the thinking out there that groups should sort of chill out a little bit and have some kind of like methodical approach to. No, I loved it when I knew a group really wanted to play in the club. And look, it's just an email. I don't care if, I mean, maybe occasionally they might send a few, maybe they would get a little too much, but I love it. They're just, I tell young musicians, this is great. We're in a good period of time. We're just emailing. It's not like you're calling the guy on the phone.
Right.
It's just an email. I mean, if they're a little bit annoyed, believe me, they don't really care. They're going to click it and delete it. It's not a big deal to them. You're not mortally offending anybody.
Right.
And I learned that as a booking agent. I thought to myself, wow, I actually am drawn towards some of these groups that seem really energetic and that follow up with me, which is something I never realized. I always figured that was a sort of a faux pas, but to me it wasn't. I thought it was great.
Yeah, it's interesting. I heard an interview with Spike Wilner, the owner of Smalls Jazz Club in New York, and he said the same thing. He said, I may ignore you the first 10 times you send me an email, but if you just keep sending them, eventually I'm going to get you in to play a gig because you're kind of showing me that you seriously want to play at my club and you're not going to stop until you get a gig there.
Absolutely. Someone once told me that the number one easiest way that booking agents or critics or the industry people can reject you is when you just stop writing them. So in other words, their first mode of defense is they'll ignore you. Mm-hmm. They almost do this unconsciously. They'll ignore your first email. And then, like you're saying, what Spike said, if the artist is persistent, they're more likely to hire you or to write about your music. Mm-hmm. But artists almost shut themselves down immediately by not following up.
Right.
I mean, I've read that you need to follow up. I think I've read like something like you need to follow up 5 times or some, I don't know how they come up with these numbers, but I think that's probably true. You have to follow up probably a minimum 5 times if you're trying to get a review or if you're trying to get a club date or something. It's the easiest way these guys, they don't want to be jerks. Believe me, a lot of these guys are very nice people. So the first thing they're going to do is ignore you and just hope that you go away. Right. And guess what? Most of the artists do go away because the artists get scared. And that's it. So it's an easy way for them to reject people. They don't have to even do anything.
Right.
So I agree.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice and great to get that perspective from somebody who's contacting folks like this all day every day. So I think that that's really valuable to people out there. Now, going back to your group a little bit, you had mentioned you tour about 100+ days a year. So in my mind, that makes you guys like true road warriors. What's that like? Just kind of always being out on the road and meeting new audiences and meeting new people and seeing different areas of the country and the world. How valuable is that to your perspective on music? And do you enjoy touring that much?
Oh, I love touring. Cool. I love touring. The trick is I keep my group very small. There's just 3 of us on the road.
Okay.
And drums, guitar, and woodwinds. We don't travel with bass usually. My guitarist has a lot of pedals and looping, so he can fill out the bass sound. Keep your group light. Here's the number one advice I would give. No matter what, even if you end up losing money on a tour, you make sure every bandmate has their own hotel room.
Yeah, yeah.
I can't stress that enough. That is the number one way to keep your group together is to just give each band member some privacy, a space to be alone at night. It's just really important. Yeah. But we play. I mean, we just got back from the West Coast. We do a lot of dates in San Francisco, LA. But this year, we go to Florida every year, Denver, all over the Midwest. And every date is different. I look for venues, concert halls, concert series, clubs, museums, libraries. Surprisingly, some great public libraries have beautiful auditoriums where they have live music. We've easily have played in over 100 libraries. I mean, if you look up my group on Google, you will find us connected to many different libraries. The Library Journal just did an interview with me where I was just talking about, we had just done a show at the Cincinnati Library, just talking about how my group makes a living playing in unusual spaces.
Yeah.
So, don't limit yourself. And then doing clinics. I mean, doing what you do, Nick. I mean, like, I'm kind of inspired after watching your videos, just finding some really, really useful educational topics and doing clinics at schools. We do that. So it's a lot of different things.
Yeah. And you said it too, like making a living touring. I'm wondering, like, is it still possible to make a living touring in 2018, or are you doing it in support of other projects, doing it to, provide a larger reach for yourself, and obviously the fact that you just really enjoy it? But does touring pay any bills at all?
It's a big picture thing.
Right.
But some tours honestly can be very lucrative. If you're smart about it. I don't go out on long trips.
Okay.
I keep our tours short. We'll go out for a 3 or 4 day thing and come back. Okay. I think for me, I've lost money doing big long trips where we're gone for 3 weeks.
Right.
And this is how you get in the news. When we tour, we get into local newspapers and then it spirals and it kind of snowballs. It takes on a life of its own. You get the press out there. And we sell CDs on the road.
Right.
I would say most of our tours in the last 2 years have made money.
Okay.
Early on, I think I made some mistakes, and we lost money. But it certainly was not in a horrible way that we lost money, because we got so much free publicity out of it that I still use to this day. I don't generally buy advertisements. Now, sometimes I do. I'll online. I'll buy some, maybe a little bit, but not a lot of your advertising can come from just going out, take your band on the road for a weekend, go to a small town and get in the news over there, do some interviews, play on local TV. We've done dozens and dozens of TV spots just from being in a certain city. I mean, that's publicity that is worth a lot of money that you're getting. So, it's a big picture thing. I have a ground game. I mean, I'm very organized. I try to be. It's hard with kids, but I mean, when I'm in New York, I play every week at the Residence Inn Times Square on Tuesday nights. I play every month at a club called Tommy Jazz in Midtown Manhattan. And like I mentioned, I do a lot of theater, Broadway shows, off-Broadway. I play a show called Blank the Musical. It's an improvised musical at the Broadway Comedy Club every Saturday night. So I have these things that are always happening to kind of support, our touring. So it's a very, very complex thing.
Yeah. So there you go. Anybody out there that's considering a career in music, it's a lot to juggle, but I think at the end of the day, it's worth it. So you mentioned that, you have an awesome wife, and you said you have 2 daughters. Is that right?
Yeah, a daughter and a son.
Oh,
yeah.
A daughter and a son. Okay. And how does it work, you being out on the road, a third of the time? What's it like to balance that family life with being gone a large majority of the time? I know that that's something that a lot of musicians have to deal with and kind of balance in a way. What's that like?
Well, the nice thing is I can be home during the day. Like when I'm in town. It sounds dramatic. It sounds like I'm never home. I'm certainly here, a large part of the time, and I work at home too. So when my wife works from 9 to 5, I can be at home with the kids. So I'm with the kids, and then usually she comes home at 5, and I'm racing out the door.
Right.
So tonight I'm doing a theater event, a theater thing, and I'll be racing out the door when she comes in. So you have to plan it out, and you have to have good babysitters and all this. And a lot of it is just how your own sense of responsibility, just being on time and just juggling a lot of things, and having a very understanding wife, and having a place. I'm sure you feel the same way. When you're home, you can kind of unwind and let loose a little bit. You can vent. You can do a lot of things in front of family or in front of friends to kind of like almost cleanse yourself. You can pray. You can really just recharge, and then you can go out and put your game face on and play music. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree with that. Without that, this would be a much more difficult life. You know what I mean?
Oh,
Without
yeah.
that kind of ability to do that at home.
Oh, sure. I mean, I've done my share of, my wife is just, she's heard everything. You know, I vent and I discuss and I analyze, and we talk about, should I bring this person on the road or this person, or you know, when should I book this next date? And, you know, just strategizing but it's good to have a place to do that, and to work out your frustrations, because being a musician can be very frustrating. It's a very strange profession. In one moment, you really feel like you're doing big things, and then in the same moment, you're almost wondering for a split second if you're doing anything, because it's just kind of this weird. But you don't always get feedback. I think that's what it is, Nick. My wife is an HR director at a company. She is always giving feedback to employees. That's like part of the business world. That's not always part of the musician world. I'm sure you know this.
Oh, yeah.
You can be up on a bandstand killing it and having the best show, but you don't really know for sure how you've touched people. People can be shy. People are going to, sure, they'll come up and say things to me. I get emails, I get nice messages, but you don't always know exactly what you're doing, how it's being accepted or perceived by the audience.
Yeah, 100%. I actually just saw this great meme the other day online, and it was, you know, a circle diagram, and it had a breakdown of a musician's time, and it was like, you know, practicing, composing, whatever. And then about 75% of the circle said crippling self-doubt. And I think that really, I mean, that really is, because you're toiling away by yourself, and you know the amount of time that you're actually on stage, and then you know cut that in half by the amount of time that you're actually getting feedback from real people. It really is a tough way to go about it, and it can be very crippling at times.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. We just went to Philadelphia. We did a taping on an NPR affiliate in Philly, WRTI, and I'm just going to confess this on this podcast, Nick. I got a speeding ticket on the way to Philadelphia with the band in the car. Okay, we're all loaded up. We were going to play a club date and do this taping at this radio station. And it was a pretty dramatic, it was dramatic. This was not a $50 ticket.
Okay.
This was like $250 or something.
So you were moving.
Oh, I was moving, man, but not after that. So,
right.
So, anyways, you know, thank you, sir. Yes. Have a nice day. Thank you. So I'm looking at this ticket, and I'm thinking to myself, wow, I have to drive another 2.5 hours, and turn on my game face and do this interview, that's not easy to do. Right. That is not easy to flip your entire. You have to be an actor. You have to really turn it on in the moment, even though all this crazy stuff happened to you leading up to it.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, at the end of the day, you are a performer, right? So you need to give the audience what they came to see.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So one more thing about the touring thing, and then I'll let that go. How much time do you spend setting up a tour? So you mentioned you do tours that aren't too long. You're not out on the road for weeks and months at a time. What goes into actually planning everything so that you know it's going to go well when you guys actually leave for the dates?
Right. Here's the cool thing. Well, we do a lot of dates, so we do have repeat venues that know us very well, who have been very good to us. So those are easy. Those are people you already know. But if you want to reach new venues, it is a number game. Copy and paste. Yeah. That's the greatest invention since the invention of the computer. Copy and paste. Copy and paste. Yeah. I don't care what anybody says. I have heard musicians and I've heard so-called experts in the industry is saying that you should go to your friends and find out who's the booking agent in Denver, and then get their contact. That's all great, Nick. That's good. But you got to go way above that. You can't just send an email to one guy in Denver. You have to throw the Jello at the wall, man, and see what sticks.
Yeah.
And believe me, once you get comfortable doing it, it's not so hard. Like I said earlier, you're just sending emails. So if you send something to somebody and they don't want to hear from you, they don't really care. They're not, you didn't really offend somebody that much. They're going to delete your email in 2 seconds. We all get emails from people from, form letters, blah, blah, blah. You ignore it. It's not a big deal. We're very blessed to be in this time period where we don't have to call people on the phone to get gigs. So that's what I do when I'm trying to reach new people. Now, we do have a lot of great standing relationships, so that stuff's easy. I've become friends with a lot of booking agents and club owners. So it's a mixture of getting some repeat customers, but just, copy and paste and do it fast. Nobody wants to be sitting in front of the computer for 8 hours, so do it fast. If you can get a rhythm going, you can do this quickly. It's not always fast, but you got to try to keep it moving. It's almost like a sport, man. You're just sending stuff out and, put your ego down and just send it and then sort it out later. So that's how we book things.
Great advice. Really, really great advice to somebody that might be starting to look to move into some new areas or new parts of the country and all that stuff. So really appreciate that. Now, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your doubling, because you're somebody that plays just about every single woodwind instrument on a really, really high level. And I personally am always amazed by that, because I just can't seem to find any time to really play anything besides saxophone and clarinet. Have you always played all these instruments, or is this something that you've really focused on because of the path that your career is going? How do you get to be a doubler of your caliber?
It's just gradual. Start on your main instrument and then slowly go from there. I started on saxophone. I didn't start on clarinet. Did you play clarinet, right? You
a little bit, yeah. I mean, that is the instrument that I'm called on to double most of the time, or teach some clarinet. But beyond that, it's just really, really hard for me to find time to really get into flute or any of the double reeds or anything like that.
Yeah, early on, when I wanted to learn flute, I played with really, really friendly people. I played in folk groups. I had friends who played like Celtic music, and it was like a chance to sort of work out my flute sound without people screaming at me. Right. It was like a very friendly environment to try out some new doubles. So I would encourage your listeners to do that. Just find some opportunities that are like kind of low pressure, where you can work out your doubles. I got to tell you something funny though. I never learned a recorder as a kid. I mean, over the years I pick it up here and there. Okay, I kind of you can almost teach yourself. But the recorder is the one instrument I never really didn't start on it. Like most kids start on it. But this is really funny. I was called to sub on a Broadway show, and the opening number in the show was for me to play Baroque, I guess it was like Renaissance, Renaissance recorder.
Wow.
And I remember thinking, like, I actually don't play any recorder. I mean, of all the instruments in the show, I was probably shedding the recorder thing more than anything else.
Wow.
Isn't that funny? Because everyone's different. I never learned recorder when I was a little kid. I know a lot of people start on clarinet and go to sax. I mean, I started on sax first. Everybody's story is different. And often students are really afraid that it's too late to double, to learn to double. And it's not. I tell students, college students, they'll come to me, I've never even picked up a flute. I always just say, look, just relax, buy a beginner flute. You can pick it up. It'll happen. Don't feel like you have to master these doubles at a very young age.
Right.
I think that's a little bit of that's not really an accurate thing that gets passed around. it's smart. You want to learn things early on, but you're not behind per se. You can catch up quickly.
Yeah. Now, how did you handle? Did you study with teachers on each of these individual instruments? Was a lot of it just kind of finding your own path? Because I think that's something that maybe holds people back, is the thought, I don't have the money to take clarinet and flute and oboe lessons, so I'm really afraid that I'm, developing bad habits or going about it completely the wrong way. Did
Right.
you study with a lot of teachers on these individual instruments?
No.
Okay.
I studied just enough to get me going. I had a clarinet teacher in Rochester who showed me some things. Her name is Alice Meyer. She plays in the Rochester Philharmonic. Same with flute. I had some friends. I had some grad student friends at NEC who showed me some stuff on the flute. Mm-hmm. And maybe I gave them a sax lesson. Maybe we traded lessons.
Yeah, that's a great way to go about it,
Yeah. And I'll check in with people and try to get quick lessons if I'm really struggling. I mean, oboe is a really tough double.
Yeah.
You have to. I know my limitations with oboe. I do. When an oboe gig comes up, I'll make sure that it's something I can really jump into. Oboe is a tough one.
Yeah.
But it's. I think students are really afraid that I think people think there's a structure to all this, and there's really not, Nick. That's the funny thing. A lot of it is just every individual has to basically figure out how to learn they's instruments, mm-hmm. and it's really different for everybody. And most people just get scared off. They don't even get out of the starting gate because they think that they're somehow behind. And usually, I don't think they are, man. I don't think they're behind. I think it's just different for everybody.
Yeah, and that honestly makes me feel a lot better too, because you look at an instrument like the clarinet or the flute with this incredible lineage of, some of the best musicians in the world playing some of the best music that's ever been written on these instruments. And it just seems daunting. That you might never reach the level of some of these people that you idolize, but I really like the attitude of just kind of put it together and do what you can.
Yeah, you do what you can. And when something doesn't work out that well, like I said earlier, believe me, nobody's going to remember. If you feel like you failed at one of these doubles or the gig didn't go great, believe me, you just forget about it for a couple weeks and move on, try to move on. Mm-hmm. Nobody's going to, you can rebuild. I mean, the reason, again, people don't even get out of the starting gate because we have this perception that we failed constantly. And that everyone's watching us when nobody's watching us.
Right.
And it's just this cycle that goes on. So you have to be willing to rebuild yourself a lot. That's key for a lot of this.
All right. So I want you to tell our listeners a little bit about your new record that you put out at the beginning of September. Can you lay a little bit of, what this record is all about? What's the instrumentation? And tell our listeners why they might enjoy this one.
Yeah, the record is called We Are the Orchestra, and we called it that because it's literally just two of us that recorded all of the music.
Wow.
So my friend Mark Cochio, Mark is a guitarist in New York. He also plays mandolin, banjo, a lot of stringed instruments. Mark and I were commissioned by the Hudson Guild Theater to arrange the music for a show called Whitman at the Whitney. It was a theater show at the Whitney Museum in New York City. This was last year, and we did the show, and it was the music. A lot of it was opera excerpts, but played in sort of a strange, like folk context. Like they wanted banjo. It was very unique.
Yeah, interesting.
But that kind of was the early genesis for the project. And Mark and I said, "Man, we should really make an album with this kind of aesthetic." And I also was getting frustrated with being held back by budget restrictions or hiring too many people. And I wanted to make something where I could, almost as a statement, Nick, where we were saying, look, two people can do this, man. Like two people can record the instruments on a budget, put the thing out. It's getting reviewed. We're very busy. We're touring to promote it right now. It's just two of us. If you listen to the record, it sounds like there's a group of like 9 or 10 people at times. But there's just two of us, and we overdubbed everything. My producer, her name is MP Quo. She's produced my last 4 albums. She was very helpful in the process because I actually wanted to bring in other people. And she kept saying, Daniel, just stick with your original idea. It's unique. 2 people creating the sound of a large group. And that's what it is. And then the repertoire is totally bizarre, Nick. It's like we do 2 different Verdi arrangements, Giuseppe Verdi. We do a theme from Il Trovatore, like very strange, like opera excerpts with like banjo and flute and clarinet and all this stuff. And then we do, I think, 5 or 6 original compositions, which is our classic, like avant pop, fun, modern jazz stuff mixed in there. So the album is super eclectic.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I have to admit, I was trying to listen to it, before we spoke today. So I didn't do any research on what the instrumentation was and checked out the record. And I definitely did not think it was a duo.
Yeah, it's a duo. And actually, my publicist was really helpful with me too, to telling, he told me you have to make sure that it's very clear to the listeners that this is a duo. Otherwise, it's going to be reviewed as just it's a nice ensemble. But the point is, it's a duo. There's a lot that we're doing with it. And I want to encourage other musicians to follow suit, to do things in small numbers, man. Just like we tour in small numbers, you can do big things, and you can make more money because we all need to make more money at this. You can do this on a budget, man, and it's great, man. I mean, it's also, I've put music out under various record labels. We self-produce this, man, because I want to keep the profit, man. I'm so tired of giving away money to all these middlemen. Dude, it's 2018. It's shocking to me that there are still jazz artists who are obsessed with getting on some record label, which, by the way, and you and I both know this, 90% of these jazz labels are fake, man. They're fake. So I tell this to young students, what are you doing? Put it out yourself. These aren't even real labels. There's a few jazz labels out there that are legit. Believe me, there are. But man, most of these labels are just going to, you have to put I know for a fact, and you would know the name of these labels, I won't mention them, but there are some jazz record labels where the artist is just putting their album out on CD Baby, and then the label just slaps the label name on there. And then maybe sell it on their website just to kind of like show that they're part of it. Dude, and then they keep a cut, and no, it's ridiculous. Oh, it's so... The jazz scene, I think the rock world has finally figured this out. The jazz world is always like 10 or 15 years behind, and they're still trying. Students come to me constantly they want to figure out how to get onto one of these jazz labels. And I want to jump out the window. It's insane. Not to disparage, there's some labels that are legit. And like I said, we've put our music out on labels that have been good for us, but no, man, I'll tell you, a lot of that stuff is fake. Artists, people listening to this podcast, man, put it out yourself. Keep the profit, man. Book your tours. Make it happen your way. This is the cool thing about young people. These young students are smart, man. They're putting it on Instagram, Snapchat. Right. They're monetizing this stuff, man. It's the old musicians who are just stuck in the past, but these young guys are killing it. It's inspiring. I mean, I try to keep up with young musicians as much as I can. And learn what they're doing because it's great, man.
Yeah, they're definitely pushing things forward, that's for sure. I mean, it is a whole new world out there. And I think also it's just like anything else where if you've never put out a record yourself, it's very scary. But then when you actually do it, you realize, okay, I can do this and I can put out a quality, material here that people are really going to enjoy. And then you've kind of set the path for yourself and it gets easier and easier,
Oh, absolutely. And look, that's what you're doing. I mean, dude, your podcast, I mean, I see what you guys are doing. I see your videos and I see your own personal YouTube videos for your music ed stuff. You figured out a way to put this stuff out on your own and do it your way and monetize it, man. That's insane. I mean, think about that. If you were to sit around and wait for someone to do it for you, if any of us did that, it's futility. So it's good.
Yeah, that's something that you realize really quickly. If you're not willing to take the initiative yourself, nothing good is going to happen to you, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Hey, man. Well, I've got 5 questions, which you probably know that I ask everybody that comes on the show. So let's get into these here at the end of the interview. So the first question is, what is one educational material that you feel like you couldn't live without?
I couldn't live without Jerry Bergonzi's Intervallic Studies book.
Awesome.
I'm sorry, that sounds like an academic answer.
No.
I love Jerry. I studied with him at NEC. He's one of those teachers. He did things right, man. He's a great person, great teacher. So I would say his Intervallic book. He's got 6 or 7 of these books out, but his Intervallic book has done a lot for me.
Yeah, it's interesting too. I always get, I'm from the Boston area. I still live there, but in my travels around the country, people always make fun of me because I'm so obsessed with Jerry Bergonzi, and he's one of the first people that I always bring up because he was one of the first saxophone sounds that I actually had in my ears as a young student. But I'll tell you, when these people that have never heard of him start to see all this stuff that he has out there and what a master he is, they stop making fun of me real quick.
Yeah, and he's such a sweet guy. I tell you, man. He's just a really friendly guy. He laughs at himself. He's got a sense of humor. It's great. It's great. Yeah.
So number 2 is who was the teacher that made the biggest impact on you and why?
Mark Borden, the guy I mentioned, my high school band director for sure. He shaped everything that I needed to be at a young age. And God bless him, he's still teaching. He's been there for 31 years. He's been teaching at that school district. That's
amazing. That's great. It's people like that make you very grateful to have people like that in your life. So number 3 is, what is one thing that you make every single one of your students work on without exception?
Oh, every student has to learn scales. That's probably a lame answer, but every student has to learn scales, full range of the instrument, tonguing, slurring, metronome tuner. I'm giving you a long answer, but every student has to master that. All the modes, major and minor scales. And then I'm pretty into chord inversions. I have students play chord progressions, just inverting triads, learning to invert triads. I can come up with good melodies easy if I know triads. Some of the best melodies out there are just inverted triads. Sorry, this is a long answer.
No, I love it. I love it, man.
But scales. Sorry, all that to say, scales.
Yeah, that's great. I totally believe that too. Number 4 is, what is one personal or quality or characteristic that you feel makes somebody successful in music or this field in general?
Be honest.
Okay. Honesty. I like that one. And number 5, what is the best musical purchase under or around $100? Something that's, accessible to most people out there that you've made in the past year.
I bought, well, that's a very good question. In the last
tough one.
Year. Probably, this is going to sound like a saxophone answer, but probably this BG ligature that I have.
Okay, cool.
I really like it. I think it was about $100.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a huge gearhead, so when I buy gear, it's really specific and it's really and it really like means something to me. I don't collect mouthpieces or any of that stuff, so I really buy. But if it's okay, I will pitch this product, the Morgan mouthpieces. I do videos for Morgan mouthpieces. I've endorsed them for a long time. That's a great mouthpiece company, and they send along a lot of stuff. They sent along an end plug. This is going to sound like a really lame saxophone nerd talk.
Oh, that's okay. We're all saxophone nerds here.
Yeah. Okay. This is I'm going on a bunch of, but they sent me a. I don't know what it was made of, grenadilla wood or something, an end plug for the sax. Oh, it was grenadilla wood because, dig this. So Ralph Morgan, who started the company, he used to work at Selmer. So he had all this wood left over from their clarinets. And it was like scrap wood, so they made it into these cool end plugs, and they look cool, and they're kind of expensive, but they sent me some for free. And I tell students, you could probably just use a plastic. Doesn't really matter, but it's nice when people give you free things.
Yeah, of course. And that end plug is such a underrated piece of equipment because it is actually one of the most important things to have in your case.
Oh, dude, it is. Dude, and it's great. You know what's funny with Instagram? Everyone's talking about like the key leaves, right? Yeah. Key leaves, end plugs, like all these like really wonky saxophone things are becoming. I mean, this is a great time to be a music accessory maker,
right?
Like instruments, because everyone's out there talking about stuff on Instagram. It's really funny.
So is there a place that people can go to reach out to you, see what you've got going on, maybe drop you a line if they want to get in touch?
Just DanielBennettGroup.com, but follow us on our socials, man. We're very active on Facebook. Just look for Daniel Bennett, like Tony Bennett.
Okay.
Although I'm a real Bennett. He's Benedetto.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
Yes, he is. But look for Daniel Bennett Group on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I post all of our educational videos, all of our tour dates. Probably every show we do, I post video, sometimes live video, but every show is broadcast in some way.
Awesome, man. Well, we'll make sure that we link to all of that stuff in the show notes so people can find you and reach out and say hello. Well, I just want to thank you so much for your time, and this has been a great, enlightening interview, so thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you, Nick. It was a pleasure to be here.
All right. Thank you so much, Daniel, for taking the time to talk to us. I think that there was a lot of really cool things discussed, not only about the instrument, but about the industry and how somebody like Daniel kind of approaches things a little bit differently than a lot of other musicians out there. And it just goes to show you, no matter what kind of music you enjoy or what kind of music you enjoy playing or what you're going for, it's really important to be yourself. And that is definitely a huge thing. And Daniel does that so well. He's just not afraid to go out there and do his own thing. And he's clearly developed an awesome career because of that. All right. So we want to thank Daniel again. We want to thank you, the listener. We would be nothing without you guys out there tuning in every week. And we also want to thank again our sponsor for this episode, Key Leaves. Make sure that you go to keyleaves.com and use the code EverythingSaxophone to get $5 off your order and finally put an end to all of those sticky pads that frustrate us so much as saxophone players. All right, we'll see you next week with another interview. Hope you have a great one, and we'll talk to you soon.